Nein, das war an der Côte d'Azur.
לא, זה היה בקוט דזור.
In the wake of the Holocaust, the world stood at a crossroads, forced to confront both the depths of human cruelty and necessity of justice. Over 6 million Jews, along with millions of Roma, disabled individuals, political dissidents, and others labeled undesirable by the Nazi regime, were systematically murdered in a meticulously orchestrated genocide. A key figure in this system was Adolf Eichmann, the bureaucrat who coordinated the mass deportations. Captured in 1960 and tried in Israel in 1961, his trial underscored the right for a fair judicial process, even for the most heinous individuals, while reaffirming the international community's responsibility to hold perpetrators accountable and honor the victims to prevent further atrocities. In 1932, Eichmann joined the Nazi Secret Service, and by 1935, he had risen to the SD, the party's intelligence branch, overseeing Jewish affairs. Initially focused on forced immigration through violence and economic pressure, his role escalated with World War II. The Nazis' approach shifted from expulsion to extermination, culminating in the 1942 Wannsee Conference, where the final solution, the systematic murder of Europe's Jewish population, was officially implemented. Following the conference, Eichmann was tasked with organizing the mass deportation of Jews to extermination camps where they were murdered. In Hungary, Eichmann oversaw the deportation of the majority of its Jewish population, responsible for the deaths of approximately 437,000 of Hungary's Jews. After the fall of the Third Reich in 1945, Eichmann managed to avoid suspicion while others were detained. But as the Nuremberg trials began, he realized his cover was at risk as the role he played in the Nazi regime came under scrutiny. Fleeing to Argentina under the alias Ricardo Clement in 1950, he settled in Buenos Aires, living in a small house on Gibraltar Street, frequently associated with other fugitive Nazis. His identity remained hidden until his son, Klaus, dated Sylvia, a German Jewish immigrant whose father grew suspicious. He alerted Israel's Secret Service, Mossad, which then devised a plan to abduct Eichmann and bring him to Israel to face justice. On May 11, 1960, Mossad agents led by Isser Harel ambushed Eichmann on a dark road after tracking his routine for months. Posing as bystanders with car troubles, they overtook Eichmann, shoved him into a waiting car, and transported him to a safe house. Under interrogation, they secured his confession and consent to stand trial in Israel. I, undersigned Adolf Eichmann, declare of my own free will that I am prepared to travel to Israel to stand trial in the country before the competent court. Upon arrival on May 22, 1960, he was held in solitary confinement at a secured police station in northern Israel as preparations for his trial began. Following the announcement of Eichmann's captivity in Israel, the Argentine government appealed to the UN that Eichmann be returned to Buenos Aires, arguing that Israel had violated their national sovereignty. Under international law, the Argentine government contended that Eichmann be tried for his crimes either by the International Tribunal or by the nation in which his crimes were committed, Germany. Yet Israel, home to many Holocaust survivors, defended its decision by invoking the Moscow Declaration, which held that Nazi war criminals should be judged by those who they wronged. This not only asserted its responsibility to hold perpetrators accountable, but to honor the victims by giving them a voice. As anticipation grew, Israel granted a U.S. broadcaster rights to televise the trial, making it not only the first Nazi official's trial in Israel, but also the first internationally televised. The trial's announcement sparked debates over its legality and fairness. Critics questioned Israel's jurisdiction and raised concerns about bias due to Israel's deep ties to the victims. Others challenged the 1950 Nazis and Nazi collaborators law, an ex post facto law which allowed the death penalty retroactively for war crimes. Despite international criticism, Israel remained determined to try Eichmann in its own courts. The highly publicized nature of Eichmann's trial was also criticized by some as turning the proceedings into a spectacle more than anything else. On April 11th, a special tribunal of the Jerusalem District Court convened. 2 guards walked a seemingly ordinary man into a bulletproof glass case. To everyone in the courtroom, Eichmann looked normal, and then they were silenced by it. As the chief prosecutor, Gideon Hofstner, addressed the court, his voice carried the weight of history. In his opening statement, he declared, "I stand here not alone, but with me are 6 million accusers."
But alas, they cannot rise to level the finger of accusation because their ashes have been piled up in the mounds of Auschwitz.
Ending his statement, Hausner stated that the court would be giving him the same thing that he denied all of his victims, the right to defend himself in a court of law. These statements marked the beginning of a trial that would span for 4 months. The court assured both its members and the world that Eichmann's fate would be determined solely on legal grounds based on evidence presented by the prosecution. From the start, Eichmann pleaded not guilty, claiming he bore no personal responsibility for the Holocaust. He insisted he was simply managing train schedules, following orders from superiors, and had no authority to object as a little cog in the machinery. He repeatedly emphasized the Nazi principle of obedience, stating, "Führer orders were legally binding." This was always said. His defense was led by German attorney Robert Servatius and other German representatives. Although Israeli law typically restricted foreign lawyers from practicing in its courts, an exception was made for Eichmann, ensuring he received a fair legal defense. The first 2 months of the trial were dedicated to more than 100 witnesses, with Holocaust survivors detailing the horrors of ghettos, death marches, and gas chambers. For the first time, the full narrative of the genocide was set out. Yehiel Diner, a former Auschwitz prisoner, testified about the conditions within Auschwitz, but as he carried his testimony and faced Eichmann, he suddenly lost consciousness and collapsed. Later, he lamented it wasn't Eichmann's monstrosity that overwhelmed him, but the terrifying realization of his ordinariness. As Eichmann's trial progressed, thousands of Nazi documents bearing his signature surfaced, implicating his direct role in planning and executing the mass deportation of Jews. But despite the insurmountable evidence, Eichmann's defense team initially believed their case was strong. Eichmann was no more guilty than many other Germans tried at the Nuremberg trials. Nearing the end of the trial, however, prosecutor Gideon Hausner would introduce a devastating piece of evidence, the Sassen tapes. Between 1956 and 1957, while living in Argentina, Eichmann confided in a former SS officer, Wilhelm Sassen, who, like Eichmann, escaped to Argentina after the war. Believing his words would never be used against him, and feeling safe around Nazi sympathizers, he spoke candidly about his role in the final solution. I will gladly jump into my grave in the knowledge that 5 million enemies of the Reich have already died like animals. Eichmann's words revealed not just complicity, but zeal for the Nazi cause. Far from expressing remorse, he boasted about the efficiency of his operations. Though he claimed to have merely managed train schedules, the tapes exposed him as a key architect of the Holocaust. No mere cog in the machinery, he saw his role as crucial to the final solution, and willingly took pride in it. As the tapes drew to a close, the court was silent, and Eichmann put on the same cynicism and emotionless face as he had throughout the trial's entirety. Eichmann looked to the judges and made his final statements. "I did everything in my power not to do this work. I was an instrument in the hands of others, those stronger than me. I washed my hands clean, not in regard to the law, but in regard to my inner feelings." He never once expressed regret for the suffering he had caused, instead continuing to justify his actions as part of his duty to Germany. On December 11, 1961, the court found him guilty of crimes against the Jewish people, crimes against humanity, and war crimes. After an additional 4 months of meticulous deliberation, the court delivered its final verdict. His sentence was death. Despite his legal team's appeal for clemency, Eichmann was accused on June 1, 1962 by hanging. His ashes were spread in international waters, ensuring that Eichmann would never have a final resting place in Israel. Eichmann's trial reaffirmed that justice must be upheld, even for the most heinous criminals, demonstrating Israel's commitment to the rule of law over retribution. By allowing Eichmann the right to legal representation, a defense, and due process, Israel ensured a legitimate prosecution while holding accountable a man who had denied such rights to millions. Beyond its focus on Eichmann, the trial sparked debates over where justice should be served, with nations like Argentina advocating for an international tribunal to ensure impartiality and universal justice. The trial's testimonies from survivors exposed the full scope of the Nazi crimes to a global audience, ensuring that the world would not forget nor neglect the atrocities committed. The trial demonstrated the need for a structured international legal framework beyond national borders, a need later met by institutions such as the International Criminal Court and war crimes tribunals in Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia. The trial of Adolf Eichmann serves as an affirmation to our collective duty to confront and prevent systematic evil. It stands as a solemn reminder that safeguarding the right to justice and remembrance is an ongoing responsibility, one we must uphold to ensure that such atrocities never occur again.